You mentioned there are principles, CPTED principles. So these are always considered in different locations that you do work in. What are the CPTED principles?
Okay, so if you go into a location that could be seen to be problematic in terms of people feeling fearful, or where there may have been some sort of incident, you go into that site in person and you look at the 4 CPTED principles. Firstly, you look at the notion of surveillance, that this idea that we want to see and be seen. So when we go to public places, we're attracted to those places essentially by other people. If we just went to places where there wasn't anybody, it wouldn't feel right. There wouldn't be that vibe or that energy or that vitality that attracts us to public spaces. So we would look at this notion of surveillance. Who's using the space? Who's observing one another in that space? Or why isn't that happening for whatever reason? We would look at access control and movement. So we're not necessarily with CPTED looking at public spaces, we're also looking at private spaces. So access control is very much about ensuring that only legitimate people get into and out of places. People with the wrong intentions will try to get into places they shouldn't be, for example. So you need some sort of access control in place, whether that's a fence or a person or a coded keycard entry, a turnstile, whatever it is, control who gets in and out. And also this notion of movement, that if we need to have this pedestrian flow and in environments where we get constrained or constricted, where we bump into one another, that's a potential for conflict as well. So surveillance, access control and movement. We also look at the principle of what's known as territorial reinforcement, which really refers to ownership or activity. So where a place doesn't appear to be cared for, where it's not clear what the intended use of that space is, then those spaces are often commandeered by people with criminal intentions. So we often have to go back to thinking, well, why did we design this space in this way in the first place? What was its intended use? And if necessary, we can put ownership cues in place to make, whether that's landscaping or some sort of change to the physical environment, like extra lighting, just so that a place is cared for. And you may also introduce an activity into what might be called a dead space, where there's nothing going on, but you still want to attract people in that area, or there are people moving in and around that area. So to integrate a dead space into the broader public realm where there are more people, you might then look to add an activity into that place as well. So you've got this sense that the space is owned and cared for, and the activity then brings those other notions into place of surveillance, that we're attracted to being seen and seen, and the vitality of other people. And lastly, you've probably heard of the broken window theory, and this notion of environmental management and maintenance, where we have a cycle of urban decay in a public place, which might be graffiti or rubbish dumping, or indeed a broken window. It may lead to a further deterioration in that space. That can then lead to higher perceptions of fear. So people can be fearful when they see environments that are poorly managed or maintained. And they also that can lead to avoidance behaviour. So people stop going to places, which again negates that surveillance effect of being attracted to seeing and being seen, and the vitality that other people provide. So there is an integration between those 4 principles. So where a space is working well, it's often the 4 principles working together.